living a full and well life is put together, authentic.
We feel it.
Take care of ourselves.
Hello and welcome back to the Wishing You Well podcast. I'm Amy Albero.
And I'm Catherine Van Eyck.
We're both licensed therapists, and we spend our days learning from our clients about their experiences. And on Wishing You Well, we want to continue to learn from others, so we share and hear stories about how we navigate our own journeys to well-being.
Today on Wishing You Well, we are joined by Bianca Sprague, who tells us about how she turned her birthing experience into a full-blown global movement. She's a doula and an activist, and the founder of Bebo Mia. In this conversation, we talked about the medical system and Bianca's fight for better reproductive rights and care. This episode has a lot of passion, and we're really excited for you to listen. Bianca, welcome. We are so excited to have you here on Wishing You Well. Before we get into our episode, we do check in about self-care. We just want to know how you're doing. How is your self-care? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. Thank you so much for having me. Now I feel a bit silly from our giggle. Yeah, my self-care. Okay, y'all, I remember that we're cycling bodies. Like I teach the people in my community that we go in these ebbs and flows, and yet I sometimes forget. My wife was away for 3.5 weeks. And at first, after you get through that initial like longing and, like we're apart, I really settled into this like really groovy routine that had so much time. So this week I've just found myself being a little bit hard on myself now that she's home, because I didn't realize like this like single life was like you have so much more time. So I was gardening, I was training like once or twice a day, I was eating these like really elaborate meals that were like really experimenty. And so this week I didn't have a desire to do any of it, and I was really hard on myself. And then when you just asked me that, I was like, oh right, I was in a different cycle, I was in a different hormone phase, all of that. So this week I would say I'm like slowing it down way less in my week, but it felt less productive because we always are forced to like, we're guided back to that productivity trap. So
Totally.
that's my self-care for the week.
I just want to say I relate so much to what you were talking about. As I mentioned before we were recording, and our listeners know, I live in Miami part of the week or sometimes part of the month, and so I'm in this kind of quasi long distance marriage right now with my husband, and I've really leaned into like my alone time here, like kind of being on my own schedule, working out when I want, going to bed when I like, not having to consider anybody else. And it's kind of nice. And I feel a little bit guilty for saying that. But it is like a completely different side of myself, maybe, or side of my routine, at least, that I get to experiment with. And so I hear you on like the shift of that, of like living with someone and having a routine with someone, and not like for better or for worse, like it is a shift.
Yeah, a huge shift. I was like somehow got like 3 extra hours in my day. Like I would get up earlier, go to bed earlier, and I felt lighter. Like ever since she got home, I wake up like so tired and groggy and dragging myself up, and I was like, what is happening? It's for me to look at.
We give and
yes.
we give.
Yes. That's why I was like, I think there might be a boundaries thing here. And I'll look at another time, knowing she doesn't listen to my podcast.
Yes, it's all information for sure.
Yeah, so I'm a bit slower this week in summation. But yeah.
Well, when you were having your fun, when you were doing these meals, can you tell us what some of this experimenting was? Like, I'm really curious.
Okay, so I've gone, I guess this is what you do in your 40s. I've had these like major shifts, and I've really enjoyed kind of like tracing them back to my family blueprint and like I'm leaving no stone unturned. And so I grew up in a really big family that I didn't feel super connected with. I promise this will loop back to my recipes. And I developed a narrative because my family did very like big intentional meals, and we were like vegan before veganism was easy to do, and baked our bread. And so I found it was like meals took a long time. There was like a lot of prep. There was a lot of then the eating for a huge group, and then the cleanup. I don't want to say huge group, but there's 7. That's like a lot of people. And then the cleanup. And I didn't really enjoy my family, all for reasons now I've discovered. But at the time, I knew that there was something really sacred and special about what was happening. Like that mealtime should be important. But I felt torn because I didn't want to be with these people. And so I carried this thing of like, food is great, but I'm never going to waste my time making food. And so I would do like either order in fast, like I wanted good food, and I don't like good and bad, but I wanted food that my body wanted. But anyway, so I had to like really take this apart and see what about it, like why would I feel like cooking is a loss of time of things that I would rather be doing. But I really love nourishing my body. About 8 months ago, I moved rurally. So we left Toronto, where you can get anything at any time of the day. And now I live in the woods. And something in this shift caused me to like be really curious about kind of almost the things that I valued from my family of origin and those formative moments, like growing your own food, buying local, cooking things start to finish on your own. And so I've defined it that I do not want my mealtime to be extravagant in that time. Like I feel like an hour for cook and eat is like, it's like that feels good to me. But I've been really excited about what you can do in an hour with, I mean, thanks Instagram, because I don't feel very creative about it. But I've tried like just things I've never, like I've made my own gnocchi without potato because I don't really like potatoes, using broccoli. And it was so easy. And y'all, I couldn't stop praising myself. I probably said out loud like 50 times being like, Bianca, you made this out loud. Like over and over again. And I was like, I couldn't stop saying it because I felt so proud, because it would have been something I would have seen and either judged it being like, what a waste of time. You could have gone and done all this other interesting stuff, or thought like, that's not for me. And then I did it and it fit in all the boundaries of like what would make it the most joyful, like the time constraints, the mess was manageable. And it turned out, I've like discovered this whole new side of Bianca and food. I mean, I'm a super foodie, but I just thought other people had to make it for me. So thanks for going on that journey with me.
Can you send the recipe? I want to make the broccoli gnocchi.
Oh my God, it was just like flour, salt, pepper, and steamed broccoli in a blender. And my food processor is still packed because we moved from Toronto and I live in an Airbnb. So anyway, so I did it in a blender, which I don't recommend. And I just like cut it with scissors and it made cute shapes. And it was like boiled. The whole thing start to finish took like 15 minutes, and it's like 99% broccoli.
Wow.
That's the recipe. Make it a ball, cut it, it floats, and then I threw it in with a whole bunch of like fresh vegetables, a mountain of garlic, salt, and pepper. Y'all,
yeah,
look out. It was great.
Well, I could see how much joy it gave you to make it and to eat it, and like that's awesome.
Thank you.
And discovering kind of a new side of yourself, or a new part of yourself too.
Yeah, it felt in line with the self-care, because it felt I don't know, I felt so excited by it. But it's still like I didn't have to give up something else. So I still got my leisure. I still got to do my work. I still got to like work out. And it fit. It was the same amount of time of like ordering and waiting for your DoorDash to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the key too, right? Like we talk about self-care all the time. We talk about how like you could have something super fun planned for your self-care. Like maybe cooking was something that was really fun for somebody else. But like if there's all this other shit going on, it's not going to be self-care for you to cook your meal. Yeah. Like it's not going to be self-care for Amy to go get a mani-pedi if she's got like 8,000 things on her to-do list, because it's just going to be like, oh my God, I need to get up from this table. Like it's not going to be rewarding, and then it's not self-care.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah. And man, unlearning your family of origin stuff leads to a lot of joy.
Yes, it really can and does, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
You're preaching to the choir of therapists.
I know.
over here.
I knew I was in good company.
Catherine, what about you? What is your self-care looking like this week?
Okay, so I'd say my self-care, like as of very recently, I'll say like two brief things. Well, no, I'll say one brief thing and then one like big self-care item. So like one self-care thing recently, actually it just happened one time, but like I'm still kind of reveling in it and I'm really happy about it. So I'm sure we're gonna be talking about being a soon-to-be mom and new momhood later on in the podcast, but I have an almost 8-month-old now, and I was like definitely napping when she was napping, like when I was still on maternity leave, when she was still like sleeping like a ton, and I stopped that forever ago. And until last weekend, I had time to myself. My husband was not around. Speaking of spouses not being around. Wow, is that just the, do we just not need to be near our spouses?
Yeah.
That's the key.
Whoa.
The research shows, y'all, that finding joy in yourself comes from death and divorce of a spouse is one of the most
Oh my God.
eventually joyful moments for women.
Wow.
Okay, so my husband was not home, and my daughter took a long nap in the afternoon. I put her down, and normally I like do something productive, or like lately I've just been like doing something fun some of the time. This time I was like, I'm pretty freaking tired. I'm gonna take a nap too. And I conked out, guys. I was just out for an hour of her hour and a half nap, and I felt amazing. I was like, oh my God, I get it. We need to nap. This
Yeah,
is
sleep
so
and food.
good.
Sleep and food, they're good. And we always are so surprised when we engage with them, being like, wow, sleep
Right?
really changes how you feel in the day. We're hungry and tired all the
Yes.
time.
Simple solutions, not easy to do.
No.
But my other self-care that I definitely want to touch on is that I am going on vacation next week. I don't know how self-carey it'll be because like I've never been on vacation with a baby, but it's still vacation. I'm still going somewhere cool. I'm going to Spain and I'm very excited about it.
I love Spain.
And yeah.
That's amazing. Congratulations on both those things.
Thank you. I'm very excited. Where in Spain have you been?
We were in Barcelona, and we stayed in this really fun, pretty queer friendly neighborhood. My wife and I went, maybe I guess it was like 2 summers ago. We went for almost 3 weeks. It was real delicious.
Wow.
We just
Whoa.
slept when we wanted to. Like we didn't press any of the like have to see all these things. We're like, let's walk and get a baguette. Let's just actually go home, go back to bed. Let's go sit at the beach. Let's eat more baguette. It was delightful. It was really good.
That sounds like a self-care holiday. Yeah.
It was. Well, I'm very excited for you and Godspeed traveling with the baby. But once you do it, then you know all the things. It's a practice.
Yeah, you might as well pull the trigger on a really long flight. Like, cool.
Yes.
Let's do it. Just throw in there.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends obviously on the dyad of like a parent and a kid. I found parts of it stressful because I'm a germaphobe when I traveled a ton with my daughter. Like she's done hundreds of flights, and there was times where I found it really stressful, but it was like I knew it was me in the dyad. But I watch some of my friends and they travel like they're so chill about it, but they're also pretty chill in other places. So I think that's key.
Oh, that's good. That's good advice. I'll try to stay calm.
You're gonna do what you're gonna do naturally. But
Yeah.
But enjoy it. It's really cool, and I think it's an amazing experience for kids to just be around other things, sounds, smells, food, water.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Amazing.
Totally. I'm so excited to hear about it.
Well, how about you, Amy? How are you? How's your self-care?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling last week was like a little bit of a I was like in a little bit of a pit, like feeling a little bit more emotional, like feeling more tired, feeling like sluggish and I like have come out of that, and I think a lot of it had to do with the way I spent my weekend, which was just very like fun focused. I felt very bogged down by my work and some other stuff going on in my personal life. And so I was just like, I am leaning hard into fun this weekend. And like, was I as productive, quote unquote, as like I probably needed to be? No, but like I feel so refreshed and energized. And it wasn't even like I did anything crazy. I just kind of like did things that like in the moment felt like I just really wanted to do them. Like I had a very long, elaborate lunch outside on Sunday at like on the water, and it was just beautiful. And it just felt like, okay, I'm here. I'm carefree. I don't feel like the weight of responsibilities right now, and just kind of like leaned into that. And it was great. And similarly, like Saturday night, like had a date night with my husband. I guess, you know, he was part of my self-care this time around, but it was just kind of like yeah, just kind of really trying to leave all this other chatter outside of what I was doing. So being really present in the moment and just like focusing on fun. And I feel like I haven't done that in a while. And I actually think our conversation with our podcast guest from last week, Erica, which was so much about kind of like cultivating joyfulness. It was so so inspiring for me, exactly what I needed to hear. So that's kind of like on the bigger side of self-care. But I do also want to talk about a self-care update, which was a few weeks back. We talked about going to the doctor and like why that can be hard to do or why people avoid it. And I like definitely needed to make some appointments. So I made an eye doctor appointment. I'm going this weekend. I am excited. I've never been more excited to go to a doctor. And so just reporting back that I've made one of many appointments, and I'm feeling good about that too.
You got the
I feel like you should
adolescent
get like self-care.
experience with a little bit of the responsible smattered in
Yeah,
there.
yes, that's right. Yeah, I did kind of balance it out a little bit. Yeah.
Just not the adolescent avoidance. You were like got the good parts of that focus on fun.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so this is so fun to check in about self-care, but I want us to make sure that we learn more about you in a more well-rounded way. So we've gotten a little picture of what your self-care looks like, but Bianca, as we said at the top of our episode, we're so happy to have you here, and we want to know more about you. Can you share with us and with our listeners more about kind of who you are and what you do, and about this amazing company that you've created?
Oh, I would love to. It's so fun talking about yourself. Yeah, so I fell into this my work. I don't even call it work. It's like it's my mission on this planet. And I fell into it actually after my daughter was born. And so I felt so angry when she was born. Like when I came home, I knew I had changed, and I knew the skin suit I had on before was like not going to fit in the world. And I had been socialized as a white girl, which was, you know, you're compliant or you behave like the good girl stuff. And I knew after my daughter was born that I was like, oh, that's not going to work. I won't be able to protect her and protect myself with this good girl cloak that I had been kind of like trained to put on. And so I actually started a global movement, but it was from this place of rage. So I couldn't really identify my feelings. I'd only learned like stoicism as, you know, being the best, never, you know, I would have lied. I would have done anything to protect like from being vulnerable. And over the time of being deeply committed to supporting parents through their birth and their postpartum periods, I've witnessed and been in space with so much vulnerability that it like this transformation that I've gone through, that when I think of who Bianca was in 2007 to how I am now, I like can't even recognize her. But I fell into birth work, and I have been an advocate for the protection of birthing people and making sure that they feel safe and that their autonomy is protected, and really holding our medical system accountable for the harm that they are that they're wreaking on families, and at the same time educating families in like a really safe and nurturing way, because it can elicit a lot of shame when you discover things that you did from a place of good parenting or good intentions, or from the advice from the very system that is grossly misleading us. And so it takes a very gentle hand to teach practitioners how to do better, to teach parents that they were lied to and like this is the harm, and due to the beautiful part of neuroplasticity, that this is the repair that can happen. But like, you know, I'm having kind of this like three-fronted war, but at the same time, I'm absolutely not compromising the rage I continue to feel at our medical system. And so I've chosen to do it in a lot of different ways through my activism, but the main thing I do is through Bebo Mia, and we teach women and queer folks how to participate in the protection of reproductive health and justice. So our main program that we do is a doula training. And so it allows, you know, people who have been impacted by the system. So that maybe they had an amazing birth and they want to make sure that other people do. They've had a traumatic birth or parenting experience and they want to make sure nobody does. Or they were asked to witness, like, so their sister or their friend asked them. And so they've essentially been in space with this incredible experience, which is childbirth, and they want to do more of it and more intentionally. So they come into our community and we teach them the skills, we teach them their business, and then we have this like really amazing healing space so that you can unpack what it's like. Like, we're in the trenches when you're doing birth work. And so, you know, one of the things is everybody in our community gets free therapy, because when you've witnessed, when you have your own stuff, like when you learn about informed consent and you realize that you weren't asked to consent to stuff in your own process, that can be really shocking. It can be upsetting. It can elicit big T and little t traumas. And then once you go out in the birth space and you witness, you know, the harm of the system, that we want to make sure that they have a place to come back and do that processing and get, you know, their mental health taken care of. So that's something that we're like just so proud of in our community, that we have such a huge focus on making sure everybody that wants to go out and do better out in the world also has a home base to come back to and get well themselves.
You clearly had an experience that triggered all of this to happen afterwards. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about it? Like, what was it that angered you so much specifically?
Yeah. So I witnessed my little sister being born with an illegal VBAC home birth in 1988. And it was a profound experience for me. Like, it clocked it, like did something. It was like one of those pivotal moments. And I trusted birth from witnessing that. And each of my siblings took a different experience from it. But I had this thing of like, I just witnessed something really powerful. Women are incredible. Birthing people are incredible. And I want to be a part of that. Because of this water we swim in, I thought that was, for some reason, obstetrics and gynecology, which is bizarre because it was an illegal home birth, which meant it was all people who were unregistered and like birth assistants that would have flown under the radar and like grown their own herb. Like it was a super DL process, but I still clocked medical school. And so I was like dedicated my life to go into obstetrics. And before medical school started was when I got pregnant. That in and of itself is a whole journey, but I found myself pregnant. And so I went in knowing I had to have a hospital birth because there wasn't enough midwives in Toronto. But I went in with this, like, I can do this, like no fear about birth. In birthing in that system, I saw how hard I had to work my birth was pretty long. And I'd say it was because there was an element of like lack of safety. So it was about 52 hours. And how long I had to work to have an unmedicated, uninterrupted 52 hours. Like, that's what my rage started, that I was like, get out of my room, turn off the lights, get out. I didn't have a safe partner. I don't have a relationship with my family of origin. So I was like pretty alone in it. And I would have been fine if I got to birth alone and like be alone. But it was like, people kept asking about when I wanted my epidural. People kept asking, like, she wanted cervical assessments. They kept telling me to get in the bed. I couldn't be in the bathroom with the door closed alone because they needed to keep an eye on me. Like all of these things. And I knew that I just wanted like silence and to go into this like really powerful place. And I remember I kept getting pulled out of it. And I was a kid, like I was 26. But I knew that I was anyway. So that was the thing that made me rage. And then at the end, the doctor came in, a person I didn't know, and he violated my body in like the most profound abusive way, and he cared like this, like 0 out of 10. And he was literally tearing my vulva apart, like tearing me apart, and I could feel it because I was unmedicated. And he kept getting frustrated and saying like, tell her to push the button because everybody has an epidural there. And he hadn't actually supported, I don't know, in some amount of time. I now know way more because I've now supported hundreds of people in this hospital. But at the time, I was like, what is he doing to me? And he did my full repair of this like destruction of my genitals. And he also repaired me with no freezing. And
Right.
nobody was listening. And my feet were up in these stirrups, and I felt so overwhelmed. And people were like coming in and out of my room, and I was very modest before I had my daughter. Like you lose the lack of like you have this inhibition moment when you're in labor land, because that's like our frontal lobe shutting down. We have these systems when you're safe that you don't actually like feel your physical body in the same way. And that is a critical part of the hormonal cycle for people in labor. But then once the baby's out, you're back, like your frontal lobe's up and you're very aware of, you're reasonable and rational. And so I was back feeling like really deeply uncomfortable with being splayed out in the way that I was. And that moment where I like felt so much overwhelmed, I didn't want to hold my daughter, which that like caused a lot of grief for me because I didn't have the movie thing that I thought would happen. This like, which I now also know is not for everybody, and that there's not, it doesn't mean anything about one as a parent, what that first moment is like. And we're fed this message that it's like you grab them and you cry and you're instantly in love and you have this profound moment, when I've seen very few people have that experience. And so I had all these like layers of shame of like, I was doing it wrong. I didn't have a baby in the like way that, my family did, which was this like clear, established, responsible, loving community. Like I had all these things. And plus now I was like, oh my God, I do not want to hold this baby. Like I don't feel any of those things. And it wasn't until like I've spent, a significant amount of time like unpacking and looking at the layers of what happened to me there. And I realized one of the other major parts of it was how this reverence I had for a system that I thought I was going to be a part of failed me. So I had this paradigm shift of like, I thought this was going to be the place that I could support birth, like that this magic happens in the hospital. And the unlearning of that was so uncomfortable. And it took probably like 3 or 4 years where I didn't want to tell people I was a doula because I felt embarrassed that it wasn't a doctor. And it wasn't until I got to like really dialing into my like feminist killjoy rage that I was like, I don't want any part of it. And I still feel, that we give authority to doctors, and I feel resentment about that part of it. But at the time when I was 26, alone, untreated mental health, undiagnosed postpartum depression, under-resourced, domestic violence, back in the closet, like the least ideal situation. All I knew was I did something that I feel really powerful about, but at the same time, I feel worthless and broken. And I felt anchorless because my life trajectory had just been wildly disruptive, plus having a baby in this world of intensive mothering model. And so it took me, I don't know, I'd say almost 10 years of where I like didn't know how to control this like fire hose of rage. So it came out, harmful. It came out harm at myself. It came out like caustic. It came out bullying, like in all different ways, until I learned like point it full force in these places, because they need the wrath of what they're doing. They need to hear the uncensored, strategic, but still like, at our systems, at our policymakers, at insurance providers, at doctors who obstetrically violate their patients, those places. But like not at all, like I can't do it to other parents. I can't do it to myself. I can't do it to my child. I can't do it to the community that I choose to be in space with. And that was hard and uncomfortable. And that self-awareness to like tease apart that experience for myself. But in doing so, I knew it was not only an act of service to myself and a huge act of service to my daughter, but I know that I am changing the world from, telling the truth about it and being able to say, like, this part I felt shame about, and this is where they're lying to us, and it's okay if this didn't happen to you. It's okay if you like this part but not this part. Like, this doesn't make you a bad mom if you hate this part of mothering, and like really pulling apart the impact of these transformational moments in a society that honors it 0 out of 10. We don't honor anything about these transformations at all. Like, if you ask people what their birth is, most people say this like cookie cutter birth that I would look at as just like trauma, harm, erasure of birth knowledge, like these really serious things on our psyche and our bodies. But we see that as just normal. And then we send people home with like no support, no parental leave, no understanding. And with all of these ideas around parenting, that literally all of them are to get us back to the workforce faster. So like sleep training, get us back to the workforce faster. Our kids behaving in a certain way in public is prepping them to like get into the workforce faster. And I found unlearning that really, really hard. So I like to help people along in a faster way so they don't have to go like through the thick of it like I did.
Wow. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And as you've been talking, I've been thinking to myself, like heartbreaking, heart-wrenching of an experience as that was for you. You're not the first person I've heard have an experience like that through the birthing process. And just, I think I'm sensing my own rage around that of like, why do we need to fight so hard to advocate for ourselves, for what we want to happen during this already vulnerable, already challenging process? Yeah, I'm like feeling myself get rage filled right now.
Yeah. Well, they don't think we know, right? That's like, we've contracted out the knowing part. Like, we believe our doctors know better, and we've allowed them to. Like, we have contracted our health. We go in and we're like, this hurts, and then we're like, fix it. We never do any of, not to like victim blame, but like we always talk about the wrong things. And so we've trusted the system to guide us through, especially white folks, because we've been in the white system longer. So there was some protection from the fact that elements of the BIPOC community, they weren't deemed worthy to go through our system, but it did actually preserve part of their knowledge and their community care, right? So their traditional midwifery practices, indigenous practices, those have the ability to be regenerated because they're not completely lost the way a lot of white folks. Nobody is doing well in this system. I just want to keep emphasizing. And BIPOC community is harmed the most over white people. They're developing an alternative to it that's being nurtured, that's not completely lost, that ours is. I mean, research shows that doctors don't fully believe we know what's best for our bodies. The research shows that the majority of doctors believe they know better for our children, and they believe they should have the right to intervene and make medical decisions for our children. And so they only will give it to us in pregnancy because they have a pull between, like, you actually are still the patient and the baby isn't. But as soon as there's separation, their true feelings, which they do feel about us in pregnancy, they just have like enough of the programming of the medical system that you have to like have that person have autonomy over their own body. Only a little bit, though, as you can see, the loss of reproductive rights in America, but where they blatantly believe that they would know what is better for your baby. So if you were like, I actually don't think I want the vitamin K, or like, actually, I think I'm going to do extended breastfeeding, or I would like them to sleep in my bed, whatever the preference is, as long as you've made an informed choice and you're aware of the benefits and the risks, it's up to the parent, and they get to deal with the pros and cons of it, right? Like, everything has these gifts and everything comes with these consequences, and no one else can decide what that journey. And I made this mistake, you guys. Oh my goodness. I used to think I knew the right way. So I tell my clients, like, I guide them essentially to what I deemed better, which was feeding from your body, your baby in your bed, preferably birthing at home, unmedicated, like these things. And I thought that they were the best. It took me, even though I was like, you do what you want, but like, you would be choosing a subpar path when I was in my like infancy of my practice. And it took me having people where I like overly supported them into having a home birth, where at the end of it, they said, that was terrible. I really wanted a hospital birth and I'm devastated that I birthed at home. And it's like, all I keep imagining when I'm in my living room is the feeling I had in transition, which is why I didn't want to birth here. And it took a couple of those, like I didn't even hear it properly the first time. A couple of them where people were like, this choice would have been better for me. I had to like, again, I was going through this paradigm shift and I realized I'm no different than the doctor if I'm trying to guide people to this way that I thought would be the best, when I can recognize now the least contact you make with the medical system, the better. Just like the least contact you make with the justice system, the better. Like all of these things. And so I was in my way trying to get that message through. Which I still believe. I still believe that as long as the system is not focused on us thriving, like the US, the reproductive health system has the worst outcomes of any high income country in the world. Not like one of the worst. The US sits absolutely last in the rankings. Like we've never had more poor outcomes of mortality and morbidity for birthers and babies in modern history. So if that system, like, I just can't trust anything that system would say, because the outcome, like, they're the numbers, the stats are there. And as long as we're doing practice-based care, which is why, you know, every single practitioner is violating the World Health Organization, and they're violating ACOG, which is the Association of Obstetrics and Gynecologists of the US, and it's happening in Canada with the SOGC. And so as long as every single one of them are violating the guidelines of their own governing bodies, we are going to have poor outcomes, because those guidelines they're in place for a reason. And they're not happening. It's so bonkers to be in space as somebody who's supporting families through their pregnancies and their births, just see doctors say like, no, this is what we do. When the World Health Organization and ACOG is saying, do not do this, it leads to bad outcomes. And yet every person walking in is having that done to them. And it's just because that doctor tells the next doctor, and then that nurse tells the next nurse. And so they just keep doing the way that they always did it. And so it's a problem. And I feel, you know, an urgency to protect my clients, and while also holding that they do trust the system and they do trust their doctor, and they do think that choice might be better for them.
Well, you've clearly questioned and then continued to question the system as it stands. What I love about hearing that is that, I mean, we have guests on all the time that question the norm of anything, and then often leads them onto like their own wellness path. And so it's really interesting that like yours also sprouted from something so similar. You also said that when you kind of like this paradigm, or I guess pre-paradigm shift, you were almost like so anti-Western medicine, but then later sort of like brought some of that back in. Can you explain that a little bit more? How you like decided like, okay, so if home birth, unmedicated, like feeding from the body is not it, then like how for like the people that don't want that, like how is your sort of like philosophy and stuff?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's expanded a lot, but I think the places that I still would like turn to Western medicine are because we haven't developed an alternative system that like people would trust and it would be accessible. So access is a really big part of it, that a lot of the things that I think could lead to more profound experiences are inaccessible due to cost, like practitioners nearby. And so it feels like I do like that there would be, you know, for most people, it's either free in the country I live in. It's not ever free. The belief for a Canadian healthcare system that it's free, but that there's more options for people to get certain elements of care. But I just, outside of, okay, I think the medical system is profound and it saves our lives when we require it. And that's really what our obstetrician is supposed to be there for. It's supposed to be there if your client is drowning or they have a special circumstance. And special circumstances, unfortunately, are being, if I put 100 people in the room who have been pregnant, most of them would have described themselves as something high risk or some kind of exceptionality to them. Those numbers are grossly inaccurate. Because a lot of times people will say like, oh, I had an emergency C-section and thank goodness I was in the hospital because it saved my baby's life. But they got into a crisis because they were in the hospital. So they made a big mess and then they could do a C-section at the end. But the walking away, the person is, birth is scary. My baby almost died. I almost died. Thank goodness my doctor was there. And so I think for people who have true high risk pregnancies, I love that our medical system is there, that they can get babies through and, get parents through. We have these tools, these life-saving tools that are incredible. But they're being used on way too many people. We're like, oh, you're too old, high risk. You're too fat, high risk. You're too young, high risk. Your baby's in a position that we're uncomfortable with right now, high risk. All of these things, and very few of them are evidence-based. In fact, most of them violate the very things that we do know to be true. And so I think that if for a person, if they feel like there's a source of comfort from the medical system, I don't ever want to smash that. So if I have a client that's like, I love my doctor, I feel really safe with them, I don't want to go in and be like, by the way, they're focusing on all the wrong things. I do want to be like, amazing. So you trust that and you trust me. And now I can.
Oh, Bianca.
Yes.
Would you mind describing a little bit about your role for our listeners that don't know what a doula is? Or like, I know that when I was pregnant, at first I didn't know the difference between a doula and a midwife. I didn't end up having a definitely would want one for second baby, but yes, please tell our listeners what a doula is. What you do.
So a doula is somebody that's there literally like just for the birthing person and their community. So their partner or partners, if they have them, their friends, their family, whoever else is in the room, their other children. And so we act as a bridge between the family or the birthing person and the medical system. And so my goal is to always make sure my client knows everything that's happening around them. So because people don't ask questions in the hospital, they say things like, hop up on the bed and we're going to do a cervical assessment. That is a very common phrase. What they're saying is, get on the bed, take off your underwear, open your legs, and I'm going to put my hand inside you. That requires a question. So if that happens to my client where they're like, hey, hop up here, we're going to check your cervix now. I say, okay, so firstly, make sure that they know each other. So a lot of times they don't even say their name. So I'll be like, hey, so this is my client, Amy. We're really excited to be in your care. Thank you so much. Slowing the pace down. We're now like, there's not a command. We've rehumanized them. Amy now feels like great. They've introduced themselves. They've snapped out of practice-based care, and immediately the room changes and everybody's a little more intentional in there. And then I'll say, so they're suggesting a cervical assessment. Do you have anything? Where do you sit on this? And I've done hours of prenatal care with my clients so that when we get to that moment, I've prepped them prenatally to say, you can say no to anything you want in the hospital. If you do not want to have somebody's hand inside you, you don't have to. And then usually they want to say, but like, don't we need to know the cervical assessment? And then I can explain to them, we get no information from a cervical assessment. It is a snapshot based on one person's interpretation of what the cervix is doing. And it means absolutely nothing, literally 30 seconds later, because sometimes they check and the cervix is completely different moments from there. And it means nothing. It doesn't tell us where we are. It doesn't tell us how much longer we have. We've banked all this content, like all this meaning on the cervical assessment. And so once my client has that, they're like, I thought you had to. I thought this, we needed all this information. And so now they have a complete picture. And so for them, they might have curiosity in that moment and say, I do really want to know what my cervix is doing right now, even though I know that it doesn't mean anything else. and they can consent to the cervical assessment. Otherwise, they can say, no, thank you. I don't want that. And regardless, it like reintroduces the question mark. And so anytime my client is about to either have something done, because everything is done to you in the hospital in obstetric care, which makes no sense because everywhere else they have to consent before doing any single thing. But that rule book has gone completely out the window. So I bring that rule book in as like gospel. I will literally put my body in front of my client to be like, actually, they haven't consented to that yet. Could you please walk them through? And my goal is always to maintain like a really safe, peaceful, calm environment. And so in my school, I actually teach people, how do we do this in the hospital when this isn't our house? We're visiting someone else's house. We're a guest in their place. And we might see the violations, we might see the harm, but like we're still a guest. And unless we're in a human rights violation bucket, where our whole thing is so that our clients never feel uncomfortable. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like deeply uncomfortable. I'm conflict averse, which I'm like doing my shit on. But I wouldn't feel great to have an uncomfortable boundary conversation in front of me, because I'd go into like, oh, no, it's fine. Like that's what I do when I watch people do their boundaries in front of me, because I feel uncomfortable watching someone else have a moment of shame. Like that's my shit. But I assume everybody else has some element of that. And so everything is so that my client leaves and is like, that was delightful. And I'm exhausted because I've been like a human shield all day long. But I want my clients to know that they're safe. I want to fill the gaps of the healthcare systems. This week, actually, it's been the theme of our classes. Families have no idea that there's no doctor and nurse in the room with them most of the time. Like that's brand new information. Like I tell my clients this and they're like, wait, what do you mean? There's a doctor and nurse with me. And I'll be like, no, I will be with you. No one else is in the room with you. And if it's a nurse, it's always a different one because they cover each other and like that's how their rotations work. And so with that piece of information, people are like, oh, I need somebody else. Like I can't just be in there with my husband or my partner or my sister. It creates a little bit of doubt when you thought like you and your husband were going to be great. And now you're like, oh, but I don't want to be alone. I don't want him to be the only person in the room to be taking care of me. And so I'm there for those things and really helping my clients choose what they want to do when they want to do it, which might change. Like they might have a plan of what they thought their birth was going to look like. And I'm never attached to it. Like I truly am like, this is going to be your journey and you're going to learn a lot about yourself. And this is, this is going to be what it's going to be. But that's in summation what a doula does. We're really there to make sure you're physically, emotionally, and informationally well prepared and informed. And that's how we have these like just empowering birth experiences, because what happens to us in birth, which is no surprise, this is where they like quote break us, is how we go into our parenting journey. And if we feel like we failed or like we couldn't do birth, we go into parenting with that feeling of self-doubt, with a feeling of trauma, with those feelings of PTSD, with these feelings of like, I'm already failing my child. And then we can never catch up. And then the intensive mothering model hits us and like, my goodness, look out. It's an ever moving goalpost that you can never succeed at. You can never like raise chickens and keep your house clean and keep your body perfect and keep your kid in all the lessons. Like it's literally impossible. But we all think that it is possible. We just haven't hacked it. And so I just know that with birth being transformative in all the right ways. And so you step into this new identity as a parent rather than like stumbling in and thinking like you're already laid out on the floor. Yeah, that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, as you just kind of said the two words that I was thinking when you were describing your role, which it sounds like is to educate and empower. So like provide as much education information as you can to the people that you work with so that they feel supported and empowered to make whatever decisions and choices feel right for them, and knowing that they have a choice. I think that's
so many,
so meaningful. Yeah, so many choices. Yes.
So many choices. Like people have no idea. They're like, I guess I have to go in the bed, or like they think like home and hospital, and then they imagine what both. One is like in a birth tub with these beautiful twinkle lights is home birth, and then in the hospital it's like lying in bed with like the sheet up around your chest and a whole bunch of machines around you. And I'm like, both of them have infinite possibilities of what it looks like, what it smells like, what it feels like, who's in the room, what they're doing, what position you're in. And I just like want to bring the birth menu back for people so they can choose.
I mean, what you're doing is just so powerful. I mean, you described yourself as a human shield, and I could see that. But you're fighting against this huge system from all different angles, from a more like micro angle and educating and empowering, but also from this other like more activist role. It's a behemoth mission that you have, like. And I imagine it must be so challenging. Like how do you keep going when it's sometimes often very difficult to see change happen?
Yes. My wife is a political science prof, and so we're like a really nice balance because she sees the world
it's cool
as pretty terrible because she's like in the systems, like she teaches. Anyways, we're a hilarious dyad. I think I didn't realize how big my movement had gotten because it didn't start like that. So I started with just like the first problem being like, I can't believe this just happened to me. I have to get out of this house with my daughter. Like, I need to find other people that like, am I the only person that had this happen? And so I started really small, solving problems. I want to make sure nobody else in Toronto feels like this. And now I like, how are queer families getting access to these care? Like, oh my goodness, like, and it just kept growing and growing. And so now I look at it and we're in 49 countries. We teach in different languages. We've got, literal and boots on the ground movements in almost every continent. Like, we're doing this incredible work that's customized for our global perspective, which if I just stepped into this role, it would have been exhausting. So it's like a slow build to get to this place. But honestly, my movement and mission has never changed from that 26-year-old terrified, under-resourced, suffering kid. That how I do it has shifted. So I do it through like a feminist business school. I do it through a podcast talking about rage. I do it through my courses. I do it through organizing rallies. I do it through like really fun laugh your ass off events where we like cry, laugh, and like poking holes of fun at like the insanity that is the medical system. And so all these ways. So honestly, I have mastered at this point, when I'm turned off, and I'm very strategic about like not turning my brain on. I watch things really intentionally. I don't have conversations. I have my sleep hygienes deeply protected. Like, I don't look at Instagram with a certain window. And these aren't like rules to remind myself. This is like how I survive. And my wife doesn't do these things because we exist very differently. And so at night when she's like, oh, did you see the new policy came through from Iran, lying in bed, because she does do that stuff until she falls asleep. My first answer is, you cannot do this. It's nope, we're not in the window. You can tell me tomorrow, like while we grocery shop or something. And it's like, it feels so urgent for me that it's like, it's not like, and I struggle with boundaries sometimes, but there's these places that for me to survive day after day doing this, I have to be so vigilant. So like, my fun time is like fun time, and my work time is work time. And I don't like check my email on my phone when I'm walking around. Like I have this division. Now my work time is significant. It's a very big part of my day. But I just like, I've compartmentalized in a really critical way that I didn't know initially, and it bled into everything. And so I'd say like that's a really, really key part. And the other part is my mission is my goal is so clear that times that I want to just sleep in or like watch Netflix when I know that we're in the compartment of work time, it jumps me up. Like, I don't even need to think about it. Like, it gets me there. And then when I'm feeling real low, which happens, if my business is having a thing plus my staff and like at home, like I can get like, what is this? Like, why am I doing this? I've made no difference. I have a few scripts. One is I close my eyes and I think about all the individuals that I've helped and protected to have a change, whether it's my students, my clients, like, people have written to me after a podcast to be like, this happened to me, or I've left my abusive relationship, like whatever it is. I know that there's tens of thousands of people that, not like lots of people heard my podcast, but like stories that I can think of. And I remember those, and those were tens of thousands of people that had something different or had some kind of healing transformation, which is great. And then my wife told me one time when I was real low that she said without any resistance, this system would just like eat us up, like Fern Gully would just like come through and just like, and so I know that it's adding just like a little bit of force to protect, you know, women of color, to protect fat bodies in healthcare, to protect queer families, to protect, you know, obstetric rape. Like, I know that without me, that's like less force pushing against it, even though that force is bigger than me. And it will probably be bigger than all of us for a long time, if maybe forever. But we have to have some resistance. Otherwise, you know, it would look worse without it. Even though right now I'm just like, we're going backwards. We're losing queer rights. We're losing, you know, safety of child porn collections. We're losing, you know, safety for trans folks, for reproductive health. IVF is being banned. You can't even say gay in some states. Like, it feels bonkers to me. But to know that it would be even worse without activists and people deeply committed to not allowing that to win.
I feel like I so admire and respect what you're doing. I feel like the only thing that I want to say is thank you. Like, you really are, like, what you're doing is so meaningful.
Thank you. I do have a quick side byproduct of this, which I forgot to mention, which feels like my main pillar, is in unpacking and doing my work. The joy has poured into my life at a bigger level than I ever knew possible. You know, telling the truth to myself. So like, if I don't really like a person, to be like, oh, they were my friend and I don't think I want to be their friend anymore. Those tiny truths, even if you don't do anything about it because you don't know how to break up with a friend, that those acts of like not doing the work of overriding what you know to be true just in your own head has created, I've become one of those people I used to ruthlessly make fun of, where I'd be like, that bird sound is beautiful, and I find joy just like watching the grass blow and like touching a tree bark and like looking at my dog being like, I love that I'm having this moment with you. I would have redded a person who said that before. I've been like, you're so full of it, life is terrible, it's exhausting, you don't actually feel joy. And I would say my biggest fuel is rage appropriately, and it's left room for like truth telling. There's something to it. Is so much joy, like so much joy through all of this now in these last 5 years.
Yeah, well, it took a lot to get there. And at the same time, you realize that things are still not where you want them to be. They're not nearly there. And yet you can still find that joy. And that's really important. That's really all we can do, right? Through all of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine.
As we're wrapping up, is there any last thing that you want to leave us, our listeners, with?
Oh, I had so many. I've put together a really fun page for you all, so you can come check out what's happening in our community if you head over to bebomia.com /wishing you well. And it's a page just for listeners of this podcast. But I think, you could take any part of what I talked about and explore it. If any part of it felt like it like captured, so maybe truth telling, maybe understanding the research, maybe a career shift, like it doesn't matter, because I don't know what ignited you, but whatever it is, I would say give it a little bit of energy, see what it's about, go for a walk and like think about it a bit more, explore it. And I think this is how we can shift our perspective, but in a way that is very tailored to you, and see what angle. This is just how I chose to do my life's work, because I'm doing it the way I do it. And I know that when I say go on Instagram when I'm feeling like I need some inspiration or something, I can then start comparing and trying to do it the way somebody else would, do my activism the way someone else would, parent the way someone else would, run my house, my body, my relationship. And so, just take the little spark that you had from any part of the conversation that Amy, Catherine, and I had, and just like see what it meant to you, and without assigning reason or judgment to it, just like explore. And I think this is how we can find the place that we want, to, find peace and joy within ourselves, as well as what actions and activities that we want to do to, contribute and reintegrate with society in a more intentional and active way.
I love that. And I do want to say that, I mean, so much of what you shared just really resonated with me. But as someone who is also socialized as a white girl to be kind of good and all of that stuff, I think, growing up associating rage or anger was, a no and bad. And I feel so moved by the way that you use your rage to create this powerful movement that creates joy and hope and, again, empowerment. And for me, that's what I'm really sitting with is the way that you channeled your rage, and still use the rage to fuel you. And so I really thank you for that.
Thank you, Amy. Rage is fuel, which is why they want to keep us away from it. We always think of rage as, violence and aggression, and that's the way we associated it with how, men express rage. But rage in a feminist context is literally the gasoline in your machine, which is why if we're apathetic and guided away, seeing that it's a bad emotion, we just literally stew in our feelings of disappointment or shame or whatever they are. So falling in love with rage is a real good thing, and it does not need to look like yelling. It does not need to look like violence, but it's that feeling in your body, like you can barely hold it, and we get shaking hands and splotchy chests, and our heart races and our stomach cramps. Anytime you have that moment, there's something there that you can express and do an action. Otherwise we just sit in it. It's terrible. And then we drink and eat and watch TV.
Yes. I know that well, but yes, no. And thank you so much. And I know you mentioned that you created a page for our listeners. We'll be sure to put that in our show notes, as well as all the ways that our listeners can find you and find Bebo Mia as well. But we thank you so much for being here, Bianca, and for all the amazing work that you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this conversation. It was just incredible.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you again. And thank you again so much to Bianca for being here with us today and for sharing so much about her journey and the mission of her amazing company, Bebo Mia. We will be back next week with another episode of Wishing You Well. But until then, you can follow along with us on Instagram at Wishing You Well Pod. You can check out our YouTube channel, Wishing You Well, where you can watch this episode, as well as listen to it. And you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. We'd love a follow, a rating, a review. So thank you in advance for doing that. But we will be back next week with another episode. And until then, we are wishing you well.